what this work has taught me is just, it's an excavation of my own soul every time. I'm just getting to know myself and the expansiveness of what it means to be a human being with each project. And that is the joy for me. That is the thing that keeps me going with it. And somehow the byproduct of that mission feels like I get to keep playing. And that is really all I'm asking for.
I want to talk about transformation and outside in versus inside out. Where do you guys fall on that divide? And I know it's hugely oversimplifying to say that acting is either outside in or inside out. But David, your transformation in this role is remarkable. You look like yourself, kind of, but you sound, the voice and the accent are unlike anything we've ever seen before. So how did you go about doing that? How much of that is outside in?
And it's not a ridiculous thing to say outside in, and I do think that is my approach with a historical figure like Bass Reeves. For me, it starts with the research, the copious amounts of information out there, or sometimes not so copious, and you have to do a lot of digging and finding and research around the subject. The events that we're showing in Lawmen Bass Reeves are in the 1860s and 1870s. There were less records of what was going on with Black people back then. Thankfully, there are some court transcripts of Bass Reeves, but they're later in his life. I had a similar thing when I played Dr. King, whereby most of what you see are public renditions of him, and then you've got to kind of go and find out what they might have been like in private. And so that's where you've got to really look around what you're being presented with. And then the accent that you mentioned, we don't have recordings of people from the 1850s, 1860s. So we have recordings of people who later in life, but then they don't have teeth, or they have that old person's speech and things like that. So you're having to kind of clean that off and think what it might have been when they were younger. There's a physical component. He's a very strong guy. I had to ride horses for about a year before we started shooting. And then we shot about 15 years of his life. And then that's the voice, the body, the disposition, all of those things. And for me, those things get you closer to the spirit of the man. And then you start building on what that feels like internally. And then the two things sort of start to meld onto each other. It starts from the outside, the inside gets stronger, focus on the inside, and then the inside starts to benefit from all that work you've been doing. That tends to be how it works for me.
What about the rest of you? Is there a outside in or inside out or both? Like, does that resonate with you at all?
For me, I guess it's always going to be a balance of both. Sometimes I don't find who I'm playing until I stand a specific way, and then I'm like, oh, there he is. And then I can just kind of hold on to that for a while. But I think the common thing that I guess we've been talking about is I do obsess though. That's where it starts on the inside. I'm just obsessing. Why is this person alive? We can get into the details of childhood and all those things, but sometimes I really just like to start with why does this person continue to exist? Not to get too dark, but it's if it's so rough, or if it's a difficult life, or if it's a tremendous life, whatever it is, what keeps this person going? That usually is somewhere where I like to start, and then I obsess.
Cool.
I just want to say that I'm such a fan of both of your work, and it's really interesting to hear you talk about this. But I think for me, it's the same thing. It's about kind of throwing spaghetti against the wall, using physical work, inside out work. I even do a little bit of dream work, and just kind of seeing what sticks and what it becomes that obsession, like you were speaking about, Steven, and then just following that trail, whatever really takes root in the character. And you build a backstory, you do the physical life, but it's just wherever that my passion goes the most, that's where I follow my nose for the character usually.
Wonderful. This is already the good stuff. Can I ask, like, take us back in time? Where does training factor in? I have down, I hope this is right, but David, you went to Lambda. Steven, you went to Kalamazoo, and Steven, I put Kalamazoo and Second City because maybe Second City counts as an education.
All right.
And Matt, it's Carnegie Mellon. How much does that affect today? Like, how much are you having to brush up maybe on the crafty skills that you guys learned at that era of your careers?
Well, for me, the thing that training really gives you is muscle memory. 3 years at Lambda, I did 3 years at the Royal Shakespeare Company as well. I very much consider that part of my training. So those 6 years were formative for me at the beginning of my career, but every single job is an opportunity to learn. I really seek out great directors, great actors to be around because you inevitably gain so much just by being around them. But honestly, when people ask me about being an actor, I always say, train. I always say, if you can get in the theater, go and start in the theater, because if you have several opportunities 8 times a week to stand in front of an audience and for them to tell you, whether audibly or just physiologically in terms of what's happening in the space, whether you're telling them the truth or not, that's going to transfer to a film set, which is everything on that set sometimes feels like it's contriving against you giving a good performance. But if you know what it feels like in your body to, despite the nerves, despite the audience, despite the artifice of the theater, to have 3 hours where you somehow managed to convey the truth, that it's what for me gives me fearlessness. There's almost nothing that you feel you can't do when you've played one of Shakespeare's kings, or when you've done a Greek tragedy, or when you've done a Jacobean tragedy, or when you've done Restoration comedy. Those are the difficulty quotient is quite high, and so that for me is where the training really kicks in.
That resonates with me a lot. I didn't have proper theater training. I kind of just got to experience it as I went along. I did a little theater in college, mostly improv, actually just doing the improv team at my school. And then when I got to Chicago, I poured into sketch and improv. And I will say, it took me a while to get the ropes of stage presence and things like that. And I'm so thankful for that era of my training life of just 6 years in Chicago, doing it basically for free. And I also am deeply grateful that I started in improv. For me, my brain is so kind of set up in a way where I kind of want to make sure I'm doing it the right way. I remember early on in my career on Walking Dead, I was just chasing perfect takes. I was like, I need action to cut needs to be no mess ups and exactly what I wanted to do. And I'm there. And it was horrible. And then I started doing voiceover actually. And that taught me a lot of just throwing it away. Cause you're I'm just doing this line 3 times, 3 different ways. And you're just going to cut it and use whichever one you cut. And it was nice to have that balance of I want to be completely present in this moment for my scene partner so that we can experience this. And then at the same time, not to be so precious about appeasing other eyes in the room. That was really nice for me in training as I went, just knowing we're all trying to get home. We're all trying to get this scene. We're all trying to make this film and get to the next day. No one's watching you to see if you're doing an incredible, tremendous job like that. People are holding up booms. They want to stop holding up booms. So it was nice to have that in between of just it's serious, but it's not that serious at the same time. And that was really nice. Foundationally for improv too.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I had done a little bit of theater before I went to Carnegie, but I really had no idea what I was doing. It was all intuition, all slapdash. And so it was nice to have a conservatory experience, not only to have some form of technique, but also to get to play with great roles that I don't know if I'll ever get to do again. You know, I got to do Richard III and Hamlet and all these wonderful meaty roles. So you're working on the absolute best material in the world and history. So that was a great experience. But once I got out into the world, I really knew nothing about being on camera. And I actually learned, I feel, just as much. I actually did the groundlings for a year in LA, and that was really helpful for me. But there's that, I love actors. I love the difficult ones. I love the generous ones. I love them all. And that alchemy that happens on a set where you bring all that preparation, but then you lose it in the moment because you're playing off what that other person is giving you. And it can only ever happen that one time in that moment. I felt like that was as informative to my stage work as anything I learned in conservatory was to my film work.
So cool. And now I want to pivot, like going off of what Matt was just talking about, and David, you touched on this too. Like, what do you guys remember about your first day on set, and what do you wish you'd known? And I guess it's not necessarily just that first day, but like kind of the intro, like getting into film work, specifically screen acting. Is there anything you wish that had been included in the training for like before that, perhaps?
Well, I experienced real imposter syndrome being on a set after all of my theater training, because back, 25 years ago now, when I was at drama school, there was almost no focus at all on screen work. And so it's better now. My son is actually at the same drama school I went to, and it's a completely, they have volume stages and they're doing all sorts of incredible stuff. But, I didn't know what a mark was. I did, what Steven said about, the boom guy just wanting to go home. That's something I wish I knew, because everything just feels so high stakes. Not hitting that mark just felt like, oh, well, I've blown the day. Am I going to get fired? Because I guess, with theater, if you flub a line or you completely blank, that's your one shot on that given day to get it right. And so I think I was taking that experience to what is a far more malleable, to be honest, a more actor-friendly forum in some ways, in terms of capturing your best work. And so, boy, I wish there had been more technique taught in my generation of conservatoire training. I do believe it's changed now, but that would have stood me in far more better stead. So I also kind of learnt on the job, but I was also a beneficiary of playing smaller roles earlier on in my career. So I was able to do a lot of watching. I think it can be quite challenging if you're new and green and inexperienced and you're thrust into being the lead in something like that. I actually think that's not the preferred, not that you have a choice and you're going to turn it down if it comes your way, but I actually benefited from my career has been a bit more slow burn, a bit more of a marathon, and it's benefited me, I feel.
Yeah, I agree. I got really lucky that I got to start on Walking Dead and be surrounded by tremendous actors like Scott Wilson, Jeff DeMunn, John Bernthal, Andrew Lincoln, Norman Reedus. I can name, honestly, everybody, Sarah Wayne Callies, Laurie Holden, but they were just watching them and their work ethic and their professionalism. And I learned something different from each person. So that was really a nice indoctrination into the thing. I wish someone, I don't know if I would have wished someone told me anything. I enjoyed the shock of it. But the first thing I remember thinking on my first on-camera gig was, I was like, oh, no one tells you what to do. Looking from outside in, you're like, oh, these people have people that say we got to go here and you got to go do this. And then now you're over here and you're moving here and you say this. And it's really just you just agree to show up at 5 a.m. and a bunch of people just agree to show up with their equipment and we're just doing stuff. And that's so wild to me. But yeah, it feels very you're jumped into the professionalism of it all. It's like no one's telling you what to do. It's on you.
Mm.
Yeah, I think what both of you are saying just really resonates with me. I was lucky that I got to start in supporting roles and watch other folks do their thing and learn from them and get little tidbits here and there, because I was terrified to be on camera at first. And my first film was with Jodie Foster, who to me is just an ultimate in terms of discipline. I had a tiny part in it, but it all took place on an airplane. So we all had to be there every day. So I got to watch her every day. And that was really inspiring to me. But I still feel like I'm so in process with that. And I'm still learning so much and getting schooled all the time. I remember I was watching an early cut of Maestro with Bradley Cooper. And, you know, it was the first time I'd seen the movie. I was really nervous to see it. And there was a scene early on where his character tripped. And you could tell that he really tripped and he just kept it in the film. And I was asking him about it afterwards. And I said, did you mean to trip in that? Or did you want to keep that in the film? Because what it did for me as an audience member is that I saw real humanity on screen, and then I relaxed, and then I was just in the story. And he said, oh, Matt, I'm hoping that I trip. Meaning I'm hoping that I do something that makes everything that's happening in that moment real and for the first time. I'm hoping some accident comes in that gets me out of my head and into the moment. And I don't know, that was a real learning moment for me as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I feel that actually about two of your performances that I've seen, Steven, both in Minari and Beef. There's such a lived in. I didn't know this about you in improv, but it feels so fresh. I mean, you know, with Minari, the nature of what your character is being subjected to in that is so relatable. You know, as a father, as a minority. I mean, I just loved that film. I loved your performance in it. But with Beef, it's so chaotic that, you know, in terms of the character is so messy, and that's actually something that I think is quite hard to do because it just feels completely alive. Every moment is completely alive, whether he's being completely awful or he's singing worship songs in a church and, you know, he's really there to steal, but actually he's kind of being moved by something. I kind of bought everything. And so it's really interesting and actually a real joy to learn. I can sort of feel where some of that comes from because you feel it in your performances, this kind of real presence. I'm so glad you stopped chasing the perfect take because you feel that in the work, actually.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Yeah, I agree with that. Do you guys know this artist named Namjoon Paik?
I don't.
He's a video artist. He's the godfather of video art. And I got lucky enough to be able to help produce his documentary recently. And he's very unknown, but he's like really well known in the art world. And the thing that's so incredible about him is that there's this one moment where he meets Bill Clinton, and he's had a stroke at this point in his life. And he's in line to meet Bill Clinton. And as he goes to shake his hand, his pants completely fall down and he's like completely exposed in front of everybody. And afterwards they ask him, they're like, Namjoon, what'd you think about your pants falling down? He's like, too good to be true. And I love that. I love that. Like you said, Matt, like waiting for something to surprise you about life, just to like, not just to be out of our control. And that was the hardest about Beef, if I'm to be honest, was every day I was like, what do I have to do? I have to do this today with this. And I have to not wink at the camera to make you feel like it's not me. I have to admit to the depths of, for all of us, I imagine, just like we embody all these people in ourselves. And shame is a tricky bitch.
100%.
Yeah.
As a gay man, I can testify.
Yeah. Shame is a tricky bitch.
Yes. Shame is a tricky bitch. As a gay man, I can testify. Matt, you just like summed up fellow travelers in like one. It feels like a theme is emerging in this conversation about perfectionism, and I want to ask all three of you about this because I think it's really valuable for an early career actor to hear, "Don't be perfect," right? And harness the power of improv and harness the power of, like, you're talking about chaos and maybe, harnessing shame and getting it onto the screen in a way that is not. You've also, David, I think it was you who mentioned imposter syndrome. Where do perfectionism and imposter syndrome factor into the life of an actor?
I think it's weird because I'm a perfectionist and I don't wear that badge of honor with pride, but where it's helpful is I always say the difference between good and great is hard work. If that perfectionism is going into, as has been used in this conversation as well, an obsessive pursuit of the truth, and if you are serving the character and by proxy the audience by going on that hunt for the truth, and then you can somehow allow yourself the luxury of the alchemy that comes with being on a set, like Matt said, all that stimulus from other people and what that amounts to. If you can find the balance of being really hard on yourself to do the work and then giving yourself the freedom and the space to maybe just catch lightning in a bottle because you got out of the way and trusted the work, but also the others around you, I think that's the perfect spot. And you almost never have that on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes, like a great football player, you'll have a run, or like a great basketball player, you'll have a hot hand, you'll sort of go on a run, but none of that is possible without the work beforehand. And I think that is where perfectionism, excellence, whatever you want to call it, that's where it's most applicable and most advisable, I would say.
Mm. Yeah, imposter syndrome is so weird because, it's just weird in general, but especially like we were mentioning, just kind of as like representing maybe a marginalized perspective or just being new or feeling like you need to be perfect in order to even play in this field. That was it for me. I was like, there's no way I'm getting in unless I'm like undeniable. I have to be perfect. And then to realize that like how you are is actually perfect. And like, that's what we're actually looking for, is that like glint of magic of like, are you confident sitting in your own self, which is like vapor. You catch it and then it's just like gone. But I totally agree. I find myself wrestling a lot with sitting on top of this craft or sitting under this craft, if that makes sense. Like sometimes I'm looking up at it being like, how am I allowed to be here to get to play in this place and do this work? And then sometimes I'm over it where I'm just like, all right, cool. Yeah, no, it is me. I do deserve, I did good work. But the place that I feel like feels the most safe and the most real is when you realize that it's kind of not about you at all. You're just here to like be an open channel for the story. And that's hard. That's not easy because every day is like a psychic battle. But like I found the groove in those moments for myself when it was like, oh, I am just here to service this moment for this story and nothing more. I don't need to pop. I don't need to like hide. I can just be there. If they catch my eye, if they don't, cool. Some tips and tricks are really cool of like how to like be to camera or like how to find your light. Like those things are kind of always like working in the back of your head. But like ultimately it's just like they'll catch you if they catch you. And that's what's so fun about working with like great crew too, is like they'll catch you if they catch you. And I come back to this one thing that this director Lee Chang-dong said to me, who I love. He said, a movie makes itself. And I was like, what? And he was like, a movie makes itself. And he wasn't ignoring the crew and all the people's work. He was just like, don't fight the thing. It's happening. It's revealing itself as it goes. And that was wild to watch someone make a movie that way.
On this Zoom, in this conversation, we all represent marginalized groups. And that comes with a pressure, I think, to represent that group, to bust the door open and leave it open for others to come in, because we are all, whether we like it or not, groundbreakers in a way, or we are in a lineage of groundbreakers. And so, Matt, I just wondered for you, as a gay man, do you find yourself subjecting yourself to that pressure, which is if I mess up, that, because I know I feel that if I mess up, it's not just about this performance, it's about this brotherhood, this sisterhood, this community that, whether I like it or not, I'm representing. I just wondered how that manifests for you.
Absolutely. All the pressures, David, all the pressures. And Steven, I hear what you're saying as well. You do feel that pressure of representing your community. You do feel the responsibility of someone giving you the opportunity to tell your own community's story. Most importantly for me, I'm thinking, I just don't want to drop the ball so that someone gets another chance after me, and that we can keep progressing. And that's where, I think I'm just now coming to a place where you do all that work, like you were saying, David. You do all the homework. You do the physical life, you do the dreams, you do the internal life, you do the backstory, you do it all, and then you get to set, and then you kind of let that go, and then let it be what it's going to be in that moment, like you were saying, Steven. And if they capture it, they capture it. And it's hard to be prescriptive to new actors, because some of that, I don't know if you feel the same way, it comes with just 10,000 hours of being on set and realizing, first of all, what set you're on, because you may be on a Steven Soderbergh set where you do one take. And so, you have to be a little bit more courageous to really step out there and just throw the spaghetti against the wall. And then you may be on a set where you do 10 takes. So you kind of have to assess your creative environment as well, and figure out how you serve that story in that creative environment in the best way as well. But in terms of what you're saying, yes, I do feel all of those, but then I try to leave them at the door when I leave the homework at the door, if that makes any sense. Because ultimately it's going to be what it's going to be. The movie is going to make itself.
Love that. Yeah, preparation and research, and then giving it your best shot, maybe to the point of perfection, but then letting it go so that you're not then clinging to it is, I think, really good advice. And yeah, David, I was going to ask a version of that question, which this is like my favorite thing to talk about. Correct me if I'm wrong, all three of you are executive producers on these projects as well, on these projects that you're nominated for.
Cool.
It's really cool. And I do love talking about like how often or how important is it for you to do work that aligns with your own personal values, or that promotes a message, maybe even a political message that you want to promote yourself. Keeping in mind, of course, that for the life of an actor, 99% of actors, I would say, don't have the privilege of being able to choose those projects or do those projects. But here you all are kind of representing these communities in this way and producing these stories. I guess the question is like, what do you have to say to actors who hope to get to the point of the bonus, maybe, of doing the kind of work that also checks those boxes?
Well, for me, producing was born out of necessity. Earlier on in my career, it became evident that the kinds of roles I wanted to play, the kinds of stories I wanted to tell, and the way I wanted to tell them, it simply wasn't coming the other way. That was not going to be incoming, because our industry didn't, I would still say, doesn't prioritize that. And so, it started with Selma, a film I was obsessed with the idea of playing Dr. King. I auditioned for it purely as an actor. In 2007, I was cast by Lee Daniels in that film in 2010. We couldn't get the film made. We couldn't find the financing. Lee Daniels pivoted to other projects, some of which I did with him, but I couldn't let go. I ended up bringing Ava DuVernay to the project. I ended up bringing Oprah to the project. And I didn't realize what I was doing was producing. I just was obsessed with the idea of playing this role and for this film existing. And that's what producing is. I tell people all the time, a producer is basically someone who moves the needle every day towards that thing that they are obsessed with getting made. That's producing, whatever it may be, whether it's the development, the research, the financing, the getting other attachments, that whatever it is, that's you're making something out of nothing. That's producing. And I don't think it's an accident that the gentleman I have the privilege of being on here with today, our stories for which we have been nominated reflect who we are. And not only who we are, but a way into those characters that is not well trodden. You know, you're seeing it from a perspective that isn't the demographic we are is not the thing and the totality of the story. It has humanity, complexity. It is, you're finding the universal in the specific. You are seeing three-dimensional human beings and stories. That's all we want. That's what we grew up watching and wanted to be a part of. And just because we are of a certain demographic doesn't mean that it's a Black movie, it's a gay show, it's an Asian miniseries. No, it's just a hopefully a great story, well executed for a global audience that will see elements of themselves within it, which is why it's universal. And I think that the only way you can truly expect for that to happen as an actor is to be in a leadership capacity. And the best way to do that is either to direct it like Bradley did with Maestro, or producing like we are doing, because then you have a voice at the table. Then you can help steer the ship, and then the audience become the beneficiary of that perspective.
That's so spot on. I totally agree. I mean, I think the producerial aspect of it out from the outside sometimes just looks like business. And, there will be versions of that are just business, but I totally agree with how I think all of our approaches are, which is producing helps you not have to explain to someone what the authenticity of this story is or what this story is. And it's interesting because like every level that you have to explain, whether to a studio, to a casting director, to anybody, each explanation can doesn't always, but can chip away at the authenticity of the thing you're trying to say, because it's already abstracted in like, oh, it's like this, when the thing is just like right here anyway. And I think being able to produce helps you just go like, trust me, and then I will do the thing that needs to happen, and there will be far less explanation because we're just going to make this together from our perspective. And I think that is, I totally agree, so valuable.
I love everything you're both saying. I mean, I especially if you're raising kids, sometimes as an actor, you have to take jobs for lots of different reasons and kick around until you can really find the passion projects. And I would just say, going one step back to the opportunities we've been provided, is just those people in power, the gatekeepers who then, like I was given the extraordinary opportunity to produce this by Ron Nyswaner and Robbie Rogers. They brought the book to me early on in the pandemic, and then we were able to sell it and then assemble a creative team. But I really feel like in many ways, for me at least, I'm the beneficiary of living in the times I live in, because I feel like even 10 years ago, it would have been a straight leading man they brought it to. And I'm not being prescriptive about who should play, but I'm just so grateful that I live in a time where I was given the opportunity to be a producer, to have my voice in there and to play a role like this. And I think it takes folks at that level, in that position of power, or at the very nexus or genesis of the creative process, to branch out and be inclusive in that way from the get-go for us to be able to be here today.
And I'd love to just say something to add on to what Matt's saying. It's very specific what he just said there about the time we're in. You know, all of us are also beneficiaries of our shows being on streaming, because that is data, raw data that is showing not only who is watching, but that it is being watched by many people globally. And so these lies we were being told 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago about who will watch or won't watch the nature of the stories we want to tell, we can now debunk that with data, with raw data. And I'm so grateful to streaming because Lawmen Bass Reeves, in the 8 years it took me to get that show made, it first came into my orbit in 2014. The entire industry turned it down twice in 2015, 2017. They did. First time around, they said, we're not doing this because no one's doing Westerns. Second time around, they said, we're not doing this because everyone's doing Westerns. And you just go, this is just, executives are so that they have it down, how to turn down a project. They're just, you're being gaslit, basically. And the other thing that was so incredible for me personally on Bass Reeves is the clearly what was being said is that it's not global. The story isn't global. And just at the end of last year, we found out that Lawmen Bass Reeves was the most watched show globally on Paramount Plus in 2023. So thank you. But awesome. That debunking of the lie, that's also data. That's a narrative that going forward, no. I know that's a lie. And I literally have, the announcements, the data and all of that. We didn't have that before. It was literally, to Matt's point, a gatekeeper somewhere basically pushing their own bias, their own perspective and saying that story is not going to work. And so we're not going to do it. One person will literally just go, nope. And now we have millions of people democratically voting on whether or not the stories the likes of which we want to tell are going to keep on being told.
This is really interesting. Like there's a theme emerging too of like, I like this idea of, I think it's safe to say that every actor starting out their career cannot foresee where their career is going to end up. And I wanted to ask each of you about how did you envision your career going versus how it went? But it seems like to all of your points, these projects weren't happening when you were starting out. And so 20 years ago, you couldn't have foreseen how this was going to go. So, I mean, I guess the question is, what is the advice to the early career actors who are hoping for X, but gonna end up with Y? There's no way they're gonna get exactly X. I'm thinking of how Steven, improv and comedy was sort of how you maybe envisioned where you wanted to go. And now I know Beef is laugh out loud funny, but it's a very dramatic show. You're winning these awards for these dramatic roles. What is the disconnect there? I guess the question is like, how do you plan this career?
That's a tough question, I think, because I think when I think about the career and at large, I'm just still grateful. I had no idea. I was just trying to work. I was just trying to get a shot at making any type of living doing this. I would have been fine doing just like commercial work only, and I would be grateful for that. I think for me, the thing that has been, and we talked about it a little bit, David, you mentioned it earlier, of like the things that have served you. I feel like the thing that I've been really lucky about is I've had my gripes through my own journey in this business, in this work, but I never let the gripes be a part of my decision making. I never let them bleed into like whether I like take a job or I say no or whatever that means. Instead I was like, yeah, I took an L there. I ate it a little bit. They didn't treat me very fair, or they didn't get to see me in the way that I felt like I contributed, but I'm just going to keep it moving and then see what happens. And the thing that I'm so thankful for now is I don't think I would have had the skill set that I've developed, or the perspective that I've developed, or the awareness of all these things if I didn't struggle, if I didn't have each step, if I didn't have humbling moments to be like, hey, you're not the guy. And other moments, again, to remind you, hey, you're not the guy, And I think if I would have gotten everything that I wanted up front, that I planned for, I'd be a mess at this point, or I would have never even been able to touch any of that stuff, I think. I don't think there is a way to plan. I think, if anything, what this work has taught me is just it's an excavation of my own soul every time. I'm just getting to know myself and the expansiveness of what it means to be a human being with each project, and that is the joy for me. That is the thing that keeps me going with it. And somehow the byproduct of that mission feels like I get to keep playing, and that is really all I'm asking for at the moment. Is like, can you just let me play? I like this work. So yeah, I don't know if you can plan for this at all.
Like, get as specific as you can, or the right balance between specific and vague.
Yeah, I think it's like all these things I found out. Like, I'll even bring it to identity, being a Korean immigrant kid, kind of an outsider, came over when I was 4, bullied when I was a kid, or just felt outside, never included, or things like that. And I would war with those things, especially in my adulthood. I would like go to therapy and be like, yeah, these things happened to me, and I'm so this. And I could have held that in a way where it held me down, where it defined me, that these stories were traumas in my life only. But I look back and I go, oh, sometimes the world just comes around and says like, hey, who's actually experienced all this stuff? We need you to tell this story right now. Hey, who we need this in the world right now. Who's able to like come from this place of understanding? And I think that's opening up for all of us, that your past is not merely a series of traumatic events that you've survived, but instead like an amalgam of lessons and strengths and things you've developed over time that like serve you now. I feel that same way about the work as well.
Beautiful. It's all fuel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree that there is no way really to plan it, but I did hear this from an older actress when I was just starting out. Her name is Penelope Wilton. She said the only real power you have as an actor is no. And I learned more what she meant later in my career, because you're so desperate to work, you're so desirous to work. And what you don't realize is, even though there's a scarcity of opportunity, there's a lot of competition, the things you're saying yes to are already beginning to shape your career. And yes, there are things you should take early on that are purely about experience, purely about just getting your feet wet. But there are things that, given who you are, maybe what your values are, where you want to go, you should say no to, because every no clears the path for the yes, the thing you should say yes to. If you're on a trajectory where you're going, gosh, why am I in this show that I never liked the script? I really didn't like the people when I met for it, and I just felt I should do it. You can't really blame anyone when you're 5 years in and you're now stuck. But by the same token, every no, and this is something I can only say 25 years into my career, every no, if applied correctly, is a cobblestone to a yes, especially as a producer. Because the amount of, no matter who you are, the amount of no's you are going to get as an occupational hazard of being in this industry. The amount of no's we got before Bass Reeves got made, and I could ever dream of being on a Zoom like this. This film, we were talking about Miss Anne Harriman just before we jumped on with everyone. The film I did, The After, that's just been nominated for an Oscar. Every festival turned it down. Every single festival turned that film down. Every major festival. We only got into small festivals, and this small festival, Holly Shorts, is why we got Oscar qualified.
Wow.
And every major one turned it down. And here we are as one of the 5 nominated Oscar shorts on the planet.
Amazing.
And if we had just given up when these festivals who shall remain nameless said no, you'd be like, what?
Yeah.
We know exactly who they are.
Yeah,
we've all heard their no's. So it's that. All you can manage are the things you say yes to and how you treat the no's you receive. And that actually starts to chart a course for your career. But I couldn't have known that earlier.
Oh man, that's a gold wisdom right there. That's so true.
Yeah, well, I thought I was only ever going to do theater. Truly, that's what I thought I was going to do. I thought I started out in regional theater. I thought I'd do regional sometimes, maybe get to Broadway here and there. And I got fortunate where I got a screen test for a big movie that was very public, and that sort of changed the trajectory of my career. But it's so hard. I'm going back to your original question, Jack. It's hard to really be prescriptive other than to say, keep training, keep preparing, keep your legs fresh. I was always, when I was doing a job early on that I didn't necessarily want to do, I was making sure I was in class at the same time. When I was doing guest spots in LA, and just kind of getting bored with the craft, I did the Groundlings for a year. I think there's something really valuable so that you can be prepared if an opportunity does come your way. And then I would say something that's been, I tend to work with the same people over and over again. So relationships for me, I'm not talking about like networking or being tactical about it. I'm talking about a real genuine connection with other people who resonate with you on a creative level and realize the type of work and preparation that you're trying to bring to the table, who maybe believe that they can count on you for something or see something else in you further down the road. I think it really pays to show up and be a generous, kind, ensemble-oriented person when you get there. As everyone has said, where it's not about you, where you're all creating something collaboratively together. I think that goes a long way in sort of continuing, as you're saying, David, the yeses can be with people who you really resonate with creatively.
Totally.
Yeah, wonderful. It's all emerging that there's a intentionality in saying yes and no, and also an acknowledgement of how much is out of your control and how much that you do have to say yeses early on. This is all really pure gold advice. Thank you so much to the 3 of you. I have to probably wrap soon, but David you've all touched on this, but rejections, and we really haven't covered auditions. I'm wondering if, to wrap, can I ask each of you for your worst audition horror story? or just like, is there a specific anecdote or moment that comes to mind when an early career actor is asking for advice, or is like, where were you at your lowest? Or what was like the moment that really gave you a lot of doubt?
Okay, so my New York low, I was auditioning for Tarzan the musical. And after you sang for the initial audition, you had to come back and do a gorilla callback where you had to behave as a gorilla with all the other like 8 actors who were in the final callback.
Wow.
And they were just like, go be a gorilla for like 10 minutes around the stage. And then they would give you a percentage of gorilla and percentage of Tarzan. And that was pretty humbling early on. And then in LA, I was testing for a pilot, and it's a very kind of clinical, cold experience where all these suits come in and they're all stacked up in these rows, kind of like theater watching you. And in the middle of this big monologue my character had, the casting director's phone went off. And I thought, God, so many things are happening and so fast in your mind. I was like, do I stop and stand up for myself as an actor and say, I'd like to start over, but then maybe be perceived as high maintenance? Or do I show them that I could just soldier through? And I chose option B, and I didn't get it. But those are my 2 worst.
Man. Oh gosh, I this makes me just come out in a cold sweat just even thinking about it. No, my worst was auditioning for a director who I really, really wanted to work with. And I started my read, and literally about a minute and a half into it, he said, "Can I stop you?" And then he said, "This isn't working, is it?" It felt so conclusive. It wasn't like, okay, let's just take it back, and that was it. That was the audition. It was, "This isn't working, is it?" And then I was out there. But I will say, Matt, your story about the phone ringing. My audition for Lee Daniels for Selma, it was at the Chateau Marmont. It was in a hotel room, and the phone rang. Room service was being delivered all during my audition. And also at the beginning of the audition, the casting director hadn't brought a camera, which made Lee very upset. And she ended up having to just use a random flip. They were these flip cameras out of her bag to record it. Had to move furniture because there wasn't a tripod to balance it in order to do the filming. And so I can feel that this camera is wobbling on the on the closet. So everything that could go wrong did. But I found out weirdly that when the producers and Lee watched the tape back, the fact that I plowed through all of it was one of the things they went, "Oh, but he stayed in the pocket." So cool. you just never know. You just never know. But the advice would be, and I say this to any young actor, as much as you can do to be off book, do it. If having produced, having directed myself, if 9 people come in holding pages and one person comes in just off book, and I'm able to picture them in the role because they are more in a space that is akin to what is the set, they've already put themselves in the top 5% just by virtue of that. You're also thinking, oh, this is someone who is going to know their lines on a given day. And I've had a sense of what they would be like in front of a camera without pages. So as much as sometimes it's tough, you get the pages just beforehand, but anything you can do to be off book, no one likes auditioning, including the director, by the way. Everyone just wants to be on set. So you want to be transferring them to the set in an audition setting.
Steven, and then, Tony, do you have a worst audition horror story?
Oh my God, how much time do you have?
Tony has plenty,
I just heard the tail end of that about a phone ringing, right, during an audition. I can go you one better, though. The worst audition I ever had, and I've had some monumentally horrible ones. I was living in New York. This is in the 80s. That's the 1980s, by the way. Just in case any of you were, thinking horse and buggy. I had and this is, I was really, kind of not established yet. I was mostly doing theater, and occasionally I would get a film audition, and I got this film audition, and it was a big movie, and it was a halfway decent role. And I thought this could really be good for me. I've never gotten an audition quite like this. But the problem was that the casting person, and she was don't know what happened to her, whatever, but at the time she was quite prominent, and she did a lot of this particular director's movies, big director. I won't tell you the names now because it'll all come back to bite me in the ass. But I just, from the couple of times that I did meet her on smaller things, I just didn't get the sense that I was one of her favorites, But my agents must have just shoehorned me in there. Anyway, the story is that my audition was on a Friday, but very late in the day, like 4:30 or 4:45. So I get to the office, And, I've had a long week, a lot of auditions or this or that, just a trying week. I get to there and there's no one else in the waiting room. And so, because it's the end of the day. And so I'm waiting. 15 minutes goes by, half hour goes by, 45 minutes goes by. It's odd because normally you expect to wait in a waiting room when there's other people. So I kind of I figured, okay, because there's got to be an actor in there before me who's really doing it and taking a long time. No one's coming out, by the way. So I'm standing there and I finally, after almost an hour, I've got my sides there. I'm really trying to stay in the pocket, like you said. After about an hour, I sort of went up to the receptionist and I said, what's going on? What should I do? Just be a little longer. Finally, more time passes. Someone comes out and says, okay, you can come in now. So there was no actor in there. It was just me. By now, I'm starting to get a little on edge. So I walked into the casting director's office. There wasn't a reader. So I just walked into her office. She's in the inner sanctum. She's not in the office. So I go in, I sit down, waiting. Finally, she comes in, sort of, right? So I'm sitting down, I'm facing her desk, and the door is behind me. She walks past me to go sit in her desk, does not say hello, does not say, sorry to make you wait. Sits down and hasn't even looked at me yet. Sits down in her desk, does not take a phone call, makes a phone call.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my God.
Now I'm thinking, I'm getting some very strong messages here, what am I even doing here? By this time, it's like an hour after my audition was supposed to have happened. So I figure, okay, maybe it's important. She's going to call the producer in Italy or something, and it's a call. Turns out it's like a social call. She's
odd.
She's talking to her. Oh, I remember because it was St. Patrick's Day. I'll never forget this because she starts telling her friend about she picked up a green bagel on the way to work today. And I'm telling you, it's a miracle I still stayed in the business after this.
Let's
and
really
you booked it.
Illustrate
you
it.
booked it.
No, wait, no, there's more to the story.
Oh, there's more. There's more suffering.
The suffering goes on and on. So, all right, now I'm going to say something which is, you're not going to believe it, but on the other hand, it's too weird to just have made it up. But after the green bagel story, she starts telling her friend a joke, an off-colored joke about Irish. I'm gonna get burned for this. She tells this joke about Irish women and anal sex. I swear to God, I could not make this shit up. And now I'm not only am I mad, I'm slightly offended, and So finally, I sort of tried to catch her eye because I'm sitting 4 feet from her, and I sort of pointed to my watch, kind of TikTok, motherfucker, and still nothing. So finally, I just stood up. I was holding sides. I just dropped the sides on her desk, turned tail, and just walked out of there. Never auditioned. Never. You'll be surprised to hear I did not get a part in this movie. So this is before cell phone. So I go down on the street. By this time, I'm shaking. I don't know what. I'm in a sweat. I go down on the street and I get it to a payphone. I call my agents and I started to explain to them, what I should just don't ever send me in there again. I can't do this again. And they were very sympathetic and so forth. So the next day, or the next, I guess it was a Monday, because that was on a Friday. On a Monday, I talked to my agents, and they got a call from her office, and telling them that I had a bad attitude. And what was my problem? I had a bad attitude.
Oh no.
So anyway, I'm sorry to have dominated the thing, but that's that's a story. That's an actor's.
I think you win, Tony. You win on the
yeah. I got nothing. I got
contest,
but and like you said, it's like a miracle that you didn't quit after this. Like that is truly the rock bottom worst example, but it's passion for the craft and it's a vision that kept you going, right?
It is. It kind of, in a weird way, it kind of fueled me. It's like I'm just going to push back really hard against this, all the BS that comes over you in waves, and you just have to ride it out. And but I don't know. Auditions are so tricky, and I've never felt I was very good at it anyway, and when I was a producer on Monk, I used to sit in casting sessions when we were doing the series, and I learned some really interesting things there. I'll say this one last thing. If I were to give advice to someone who has to go audition, what I found was that it's when when actors talk too much outside of the material, when they start telling stories or start talking about their lives or personal things or what happened to them on the way to the audition. I don't, unless you're Robin Williams or somebody like that, it's not, I would recommend saying less and not staying too long at the fair. Kind of leave them wanting more. That would be my thing.
That's great. This is all great advice. Thank you so much, everyone. It sounds like another theme that's emerging is, for better or worse, like you learn from the good times and you learn from the bad, and it all happens for a reason, the good stuff and the bad.
Yeah, I think that's true.
You can use it.
Yeah. And
well, the tricky thing, I think, as an actor is sometimes you will see some actors really great performances earlier on in their career because they are still pulling on a life lived. But as success comes along and it's a more rarefied existence, you can see, I feel I can see a little bit of a drop in the quality quotient. And I think one of the things as an actor to really embrace and run towards are the pitfalls, the failures, the challenges. Extricate yourself from the bubble that is quote unquote celebrity and all of that in order to go back to the well that is life. And I think that these challenges we're talking about are part of it. To push them away, resist them, to almost deny their existence is actually to rob yourself of what makes us human beings. Failure is a massive part of not only who we are, but what we watch on screen. No one wants to watch a perfect person. Drama, by definition, is conflict. Conflict means you're being challenged. And so therefore, those experiences are what lend themselves to you being a better actor, I think. And so running away from them, I don't actually think is the thing. I don't know that I could say that again with as much assurance earlier on in my career, because you want everything to be perfect. Like Steven said, you're chasing the perfect take. You want to be able to sustain yourself financially. You want all the bad stuff to be away. But that's not what we tend to show on screen. Every one of us here, I guarantee you, the performances we gave were steeped in challenges. And some of what we've talked about here just now feed into the reality of that because it's a lived experience.
100%. Way to tie it all together. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to the four of you for joining. You're all such legends, and I'm such a fan. Congratulations on your SAG Award nominations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.